Vielen Dank.
All right, so we're going to talk about Afghanistan because
wir sprechen also von Afghanistan.
You can feel it coming.
Sorry, everyone. Let's talk about Afghanistan.
Gut, sprechen wir also über
With the
Afghanistan.
moves towards a potential reduction in violence.
Es geht ja um eine
If all
mögliche
goes well,
Reduzierung
possibly even
der
a peace
Gewalt
deal.
und
This
wenn
means
das gut
that
funktioniert,
the
könnte es
US will
vielleicht sogar
pull
zu
out
einem
troops.
Friedensabkommen
That is likely
kommen.
followed by a withdrawal also of NATO troops.
Und dann
right?
könnte es zum
troops from
Abzug
NATO allies.
der
But my
amerikanischen
question
Truppen kommen,
is,
gefolgt
if
von einem
we
Abzug der
need
NATO-Truppen.
to
Meine
monitor what's
Frage ist
happening on
jetzt
the
also,
ground, if these withdrawals, at least on the
wenn
NATO
wir
side,
überwachen müssen, was am Boden passiert, also Truppenrückzug, wenn das an gewisse Bedingungen gebunden ist. Wenn Sie nicht mehr da sind, wer überwacht das dann? Wie wissen wir, ob die Taliban diese Bedingungen einhalten? Und im Laufe des Krieges, der ja der längste in der NATO-Geschichte ist, wie sieht das mit ISIS aus als Zusatzfaktor? Wie machen Sie das? Wie werden Sie damit umgehen?
So first of all, I think we understand that we are not leaving Afghanistan and we don't have a deal, but we are closer to a deal. And what we have said, NATO has said, the US has said, is that we are prepared to adjust our presence if Taliban demonstrates real will and capability to reduce violence. And of course, we are in Afghanistan to create the conditions for peace. The aim is not to stay in Afghanistan as long as possible. The aim for our presence in Afghanistan is to send a message to Taliban that they will never win on the battlefield, but they have to sit down and make real compromises around the negotiating table. The only lasting solution to the crisis conflict in Afghanistan is an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process. So actually, one of the main goals we have now is to try to initiate, to facilitate a start of Afghan talks, Afghan negotiations. But again, we have said that everything we do in Afghanistan will be conditions-based. We will only reduce our presence if we see that Taliban is really able and willing to deliver, and then we will do it step by step. Let me also briefly add that, of course, the US is talking with the Taliban, but the US is consulting closely with all NATO allies. We have 16,000 troops there, many of which are non-US troops. And of course, this is also about NATO adjusting our troop levels in Afghanistan.
Die NATO wird auch ihre Truppenstärke zurückfahren, wenn die Bedingungen gegeben sind. Im Moment kontrollieren die Taliban ungefähr die Hälfte des Territoriums.
No, but this is about finding a compromise. I mean,
es geht ja darum, einen Kompromiss zu finden. Wir alle müssen
that
uns
we have
im
been longer in
Klaren sein, dass wir schon so lange in Afghanistan sind und
Also I was Prime Minister in Norway in 2001 when they made the first decisions to send Norwegian troops to Afghanistan. And if Ben had told me in 2001 that we were going to be there now, I would say
dass wir 2020 immer noch da sind, hätte ich gesagt, unmöglich, das kann überhaupt nicht sein. Wir müssen also eine Möglichkeit finden, wie wir auf verantwortliche Art und Weise unsere Truppenpräsenz dort zurückfahren können und müssen dabei sicherstellen, dass Afghanistan nicht wieder zum Rückzugsort für Terroristen wird. Und das können wir am besten machen, indem wir die afghanischen Sicherheitskräfte ausbilden, damit sie selbst in der Lage sind, die Verantwortung für ihr Land zu übernehmen. Und das machen wir auch. Die NATO ist ja nicht mehr in einem Kampfeinsatz in Afghanistan, es ist eine Ausbildungsmission. Wir möchten sicherstellen, dass die Afghanen selbst ihr Land stabilisieren können und selbst die Stärke haben, mit den Taliban einfach ein Abkommen zu schließen. Herr Generalsekretär, ich möchte auf das zurückkommen, was Sie vorhin gesagt haben. Sie sind anscheinend gewesen zu sein, der ein positives Feedback vom Präsidenten der Vereinigten Staaten bekommen hat, auf Twitter zum Beispiel. Können Sie uns da etwas beibringen? Können Sie einen Tipp geben an Ihre europäischen Kollegen?
Well, also I believe in the strength of North America and Europe working together.
Ich glaube daran, dass
we have been
Amerika
extremely
und Europa am
successful,
besten
and we deliver a
zusammenarbeiten.
lot
Dann sind
when
wir
we
stark,
are
wir sind
able to stand
erfolgreich
together.
gewesen.
Then, of course, I'm not
erfolgreich, wenn wir
naive,
zusammenarbeiten.
and I'm
Ich
reading
bin natürlich nicht
newspapers, so
naiv.
I've
Ich lese
seen
auch die
that there are some
Zeitungen.
disagreements
Ich
between us.
weiß, dass
We
es
are 29
Unstimmigkeiten
different
gibt.
allies.
Wir sind natürlich 29 verschiedene Länder, wir haben verschiedene politische Parteien, verschiedene Ziele, natürlich gibt es Unterschiede, da muss man nicht drum herum reden. Meine Botschaft ist aber, dass wir diese Unterschiede auch früher schon hatten. Denken Sie an die Suez-Krise 1956 und über die ganze Geschichte hinweg gab es immer Unterschiede. Und wir haben auch heute Unterschiede. Wir sind aber in der Lage, damit umzugehen. Wir können uns einigen, was wir machen für die Sicherheit. Denn trotz Unterschiede beim Thema Handel, Klimaschutz und so weiter, das sind erhebliche Unterschiede, aber natürlich müssen wir zusammenarbeiten, wenn es um die europäische Sicherheit geht, mehr Truppen, mehr Ausbildungen, gemeinsame Übungen. Da hat sich viel getan im positiven Sinne. Wir sagen also nicht, dass es diese Unterschiede nicht gibt oder dass sie nicht wichtig sind, aber was die NATO betrifft, haben wir doch immer wieder diese Unterschiede überwunden. Wir sind in der Lage gewesen, die Vorteile zu sehen, wenn wir zusammenarbeiten. Und wir haben viel erreicht, zum Beispiel im Kampf gegen den IS. Würden Sie also sagen, der Artikel 5 hat immer noch die Bedeutung wie früher? Wir haben ja auch Kritikpunkte gehört von einigen der wichtigsten
Article 5 is the core of NATO.
Immer noch der Kern
and of course the importance of Article 5 is to deter conflict.
5 liegt natürlich darin, abschrecken zu wirken. Unsere Aufgabe ist ja nicht, Kriege zu führen, sondern Kriege zu verhindern. Und das machen wir am besten, indem wir potenziellen Gegnern zeigen, wenn ein Partner angegriffen wird, wird die ganze NATO reagieren. Und so konnten wir seit mehr als 70 Jahren den Frieden bewahren. Solange das also glaubwürdig ist, wird es keine Konflikte geben. Dann sind wir auf der sicheren Seite. Die USA und auch die europäischen Partner engagieren sich weiterhin, stehen weiter für Artikel 5. Aber nicht nur in Worten, sondern auch in Taten. Man kann sich kaum ein stärkeres Eintreten für Artikel 5 vorstellen. Die USA haben ihre Präsenz in Europa gesteigert. Wir haben ja 20.000 Truppen im Programm Europa 20.000 Truppen. Und das ist doch ein starkes Signal, mehr als in den letzten Jahrzehnten. Man kann sich ja kaum ein stärkeres Engagement vorstellen. Dazu möchte ich noch sagen, zum ersten Mal in unserer Geschichte haben wir jetzt einsatzbereite Truppen in Polen zum Beispiel, in den baltischen Ländern, also im östlichen Teil. Und das ist eine klare Botschaft, die NATO ist da. Das ist doch ein ganz klares Zeichen, wie engagiert wir sind. Wir haben wenig Zeit, aber vielleicht möchte jemand ganz kurz eine Frage stellen. Ansonsten würden wir weitermachen. Ja, hier ist jemand aufgesprungen, ganz hinten. Können Sie sich kurz vorstellen, ganz kurz die Frage stellen.
Perhaps can someone give the microphone?
Ein Mikrofon brauchen wir noch.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm François Hesbourg.
François Hesbourg.
My question to Jens Stoltenberg is the following. You mentioned China as a challenge and an opportunity.
Neue Herausforderung, aber auch als Chance.
What role can
Welche
NATO play
Rolle kann die NATO dabei
in
spielen,
helping
wenn es
avoid a
darum
rift
geht, eine
between the
Kluft
US
zu
and
vermeiden
Europe
zwischen den USA
in the
und
manner in which to
China,
approach China? We
wenn
already
es
see
darum
today
geht, wie man mit China
that there
umgeht.
is a policy
Wir sehen ja
push
heute,
by the United
dass
States
die
on the
USA
5G business.
zum Thema
Europe
5G
is
ganz
divided
entschieden
about how to
auftreten und
respond.
Europa ist uneins, wie
What
man da
can
reagieren
NATO
soll.
to
Was kann
avoid
also
the
die
China
NATO
factor
tun,
over the
um zu
next
verhindern,
decades
dass in den nächsten Jahrzehnten
becoming
der China-Faktor
the wedge issue
zu einem
between the
Keil
US
wird,
and
der
Europe?
getrieben wird zwischen Europa und
So what we can do
die
is
USA.
that we can bring Europe
Wir
and
können
North
Folgendes machen. Wir
America
können
together
Europa und
and to
Nordamerika
address and
zusammenbringen,
discuss
sodass
the
gemeinsam gesprochen
implications
wird
of the
über die
rise of China and
Auswirkungen
how
dieses
NATO
Aufstiegs von China.
should make sure that we
Wie
also
kann die NATO
are
sicherstellen,
united in
dass
dealing
wir
with those
gemeinsam
challenges.
mit diesen
And that's
Herausforderungen
exactly,
umgehen?
you know, for the first time in NATO's
Und es ist
history,
ja zum
we
ersten Mal
are
in der
now
Geschichte der
addressing
NATO so, dass wir
China.
jetzt mit China in dieser
it
Weise
was
umgehen müssen.
at our leaders'
China. Aber ich glaube, dass es wichtig ist, mit China zu sprechen. Genauso wie auch beim Thema Nahost, Rüstungskontrolle, bei allen anderen Themen. Und die NATO hat auch Leitlinien oder Grundforderungen aufgestellt. Wie sieht es aus mit Infrastruktur, Investitionen, 5G und so weiter. Ich sage nicht, dass alles schon koordiniert ist, dass alles gelöst ist. Aber die NATO ist doch die einzige Plattform, wo Nordamerika, Europa täglich zusammenkommen und verschiedene Probleme und Herausforderungen besprechen können. Und dazu gehört auch China. Wir haben also diese Plattform in der NATO und so können wir gemeinsam eine Lösung entwickeln.
Mr. Secretary General, I'd like to bring in a
Herr
question from our
Generalsekretär, ich
audience, from
möchte
Hannah
noch
Neumann,
von dem Publikum eine
dear to your heart. She asks, how will you ensure that any deal in Afghanistan will
Die Frage
continue
ist, wie
to
können Sie
promote women's
sicherstellen,
rights? This is
dass
something
auch
that you care about so
Frauenrechte
deeply.
durch
It's something that has been
Abkommen in Afghanistan
one of
geschützt
NATO's
werden?
stated goals, and I mean, we can
Das
argue
ist ja
whether
auch eines
that's
der
going so
erklärten
well
Ziele der
at the
NATO.
moment. But if you
Im
leave,
Moment ist das
who's going to be
unsicher,
there
wie es
to
weitergeht,
continue these
wenn
programs?
die
Who's
NATO
going to
also
protect
geht.
the people who are
Wer
continuing the program?
schützt die
First of
Menschen
all,
dort? Wer
we
schützt auch
have
die
not decided to
Frauenrechte?
leave
Also
Afghanistan.
zunächst mal haben
What
wir
we
nicht
have
beschlossen,
decided
aus
is to
Afghanistan zurückzuziehen.
be
Was
ready
wir
to
beschlossen haben,
adjust
ist, dass
our
wir
force
bereit
level
sind,
if
unsere
Taliban
Truppenstärke
delivers
anzupassen, wenn die
and
Taliban
demonstrate their will and capability
zeigen,
to
dass sie
reduce
bereit und willens
violence.
sind, die Gewalt
Second, I think that
zurückzuschrauben.
one of the great achievements we have
Eines, was wir erreicht haben,
to take place in Afghanistan over these years is
wozu wir beigetragen haben
to
in
strengthen the role of
Afghanistan,
women
ist,
in
dass die
Afghanistan.
Rolle der
Many more
Frauen in
girls,
Afghanistan
women have
gestärkt
education
werden.
and we have
Viele
empowered
Frauen
women.
und
They are
Mädchen
much
sind
stronger
in
now
das
than they were in
Bildungssystem gekommen, mehr als es vorher der Fall war,
Thirdly,
viel mehr als
at some
2001.
stage, the Afghans have to be in charge
Irgendwann
fully
müssen
of
die
their own
Afghanen
future.
ja selbst zuständig sein für
And
ihre
this is the
eigene
message
Zukunft.
from the Afghans. I met
das ist
with
auch die Botschaft
President
der
Ghani
afghanischen
yesterday.
Seite. Ich habe
Of course,
gestern
at
mit
some
Präsident
stage,
Ghani
it has to be
gesprochen.
an
Und
Afghan-owned peace
natürlich
process.
muss der Friedensprozess auch ein
And therefore we need to
afghanischer sein,
find
von
this balance between
afghanischer Seite getragen.
supporting,
Wir brauchen
helping
also
them,
dieses Gleichgewicht
but also
zwischen
at some
unserer
stage enabling them
Unterstützung,
to
aber
fully be in
gleichzeitig
charge
auch
of their own
der
future. We will do
Hilfe zur
whatever we can
Selbsthilfe,
to
dass
make
die
sure
Afghanen selbst
that,
ihre Zukunft gestalten.
the gains we made, for instance, when
Die
it comes to
Fortschritte, die wir zum
education,
Beispiel
women's
gemacht haben
rights
im
are
Bildungsbereich,
preserved.
Bildung für Frauen und Mädchen,
At the same time,
das muss geschützt werden. Aber gleichzeitig müssen wir ja auch eine dauerhafte Friedenslösung aushandeln und das muss schrittweise erfolgen. Es muss an Bedingungen geknüpft sein. So kann geschützt werden, was wir bereits erreicht haben. Vielen Dank für Ihre Zeit. Ich weiß, Sie müssen weiter.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to come after you. Thank you again.
Werden wir den amerikanischen Außenminister Mike Pompeo. Vielen Dank, dass Sie hier waren.
Now we stay?
Yeah, they put the teleprompter.
Now we go. We can leave because he's going to talk.
No, it's fine. They fixed the teleprompter.
Why?
Oh, the speech, but he's...
Then why didn't we keep talking with SecGen?
Yeah, let's just sit down.
Oh, there he is.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Secretary of State of the United States of America, Mike Pompeo.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you all. Foreign dignitaries, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of Congress who are with us here today. It's my honor to be here this morning. It's great to be back at the Munich Security Conference. I was just talking with some of the leaders. It's been here many times. I came here with Senator McCain. I came here as the CI director. I'm also not new to Munich. If you're looking for a good beer hall from the late 80s, I can find it. This is also the third trip to Germany in just the past 4 months. I was in Berlin in November to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. was an incredibly special trip for me personally, as I had the incredible privilege to serve on Freedom's frontier from 1986 to 1980 time, patrolling the then East German, West German boundary during the Cold War as a young officer in the United States Army. Just a little younger, not that much. It was thrilling for me, I remember, to watch when Freedom won, to watch people dancing on the Berlin Wall, as we all saw, people who had been so cruelly separated for decades. It was an incredible celebration of freedom and of sovereignty. The people of East Berlin and the people of East Germany knew that the end of the evil empire's occupation was at hand. And our countries together have maintained our freedoms and our sovereignty for the past 30 plus years now. We should all be incredibly proud of that. We've done it through the challenges of radical Islamic terrorism. We've done it through a global financial crisis. And we're doing it now in the face of an increasingly aggressive Chinese Communist Party. But over the past few years, we've all seen Democratic leaders questioning America's commitment to the transatlantic alliance and America's leadership in the world. A few recent quotes from Western leaders. These quotes frankly surprised me. The first was from the middle of 2017. Quote, "The fact that our friend and ally has come to question the very worth of its mantle of global leadership puts into sharper focus the need for the rest of us to set our own clear and sovereign course." End of quote. The second one is from about a year ago. So, quote, "The multilateral order is experiencing its perhaps gravest crisis since its emergence after the Second World War." End of quote. The final one was from just yesterday. A quote suggesting, quote, that the United States rejects the international community. End of quote. I'm here this morning to tell you the facts. Those statements simply do not affect in any significant way or reflect reality. I'm happy to report that the death of the transatlantic alliance is grossly over-exaggerated. The West is winning. We are collectively winning. We're doing it together. Let's start with a simple fact. Free nations are simply more successful than any other model that's been tried in the history of civilization. Our governments respect basic human rights, they foster economic prosperity, and they keep us all secure. It's why so many people risk a dangerous journey across the Mediterranean to reach Greece and Italy. But you don't see the world's vulnerable people risking their lives to skip illegally en masse to countries like Iran or to Cuba. It's why people clamor to study in Cambridge and not Caracas. It's why they compete to start businesses in Silicon Valley, but not in St. Petersburg. Countries in Asia went from abject poverty in the 1950s and 60s to become world-leading economies today. You've all seen the map of the differences between South and Korea, that light-studded map with North Korea in complete darkness. Just look at the winning westward path of other nations. Vietnam has moved into our same direction since the 1980s. I'll head off from here to Africa. I'll be in Ethiopia, a country working hard to reform its economy. It wants to be more like us. Today, throughout the Western Hemisphere, we have only Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela as redoubts of authoritarianism. Meanwhile, the United States is thriving. Our political system is free and enormously resilient. Our economy, too, is strong. The overall unemployment rate is the lowest in more than half a century. Economic growth tripping right along. The unemployment rate for women is at the lowest level in almost 70 years. Wages are rising for all income levels in the United States, including our blue-collar workers. This is the power of the Western idea.
der westlichen Idee.
You know, I saw the topic for this weekend's gathering, this idea of westlessness.
Ich habe
as the
gehört,
core
dass das
theme
Thema der
for this year's
Konferenz
conference.
Westlosigkeit ist, was auch
And
immer das bedeuten
I'm sure,
soll.
too, there are many of you who would call
Ich weiß,
yourself here
dass viele im
realists.
Raum sind, die sich als
Well, let me
außenpolitische
give you an idea
Realpolitiker
of what's real.
bezeichnen würden. Aber ich möchte
The
Ihnen
West is
einmal
winning.
sagen, weil die Realität
Freedom
aussieht,
and democracy
der
are winning.
Westen gewinnt.
And by that, I
Freiheit,
don't mean
Demokratie
just
gewinnen,
geographical
obsiegen.
nations.
Und mit
The
Westen
West
meine ich
doesn't
nicht nur
define a
geografische
space or a
Westen.
piece of
Nein.
real estate.
Der
It's
Westen ist
any
nicht
nation.
nur
Any nation
ein
that
Stück
adopts a
Land
model
oder
of
Grund.
respect for
Nein, das
individual
ist
freedom,
ein Modell, ein
free
westliches Modell.
enterprise,
Und
national
welche
sovereignty,
Nation auch
they're
immer dieses
part
Modell
of this
annimmt
idea
oder übernimmt.
of the West.
Achtung für Freiheit des Einzelnen,
I
freie
want to talk
Unternehmensführung
for
und so
a
weiter.
minute this morning
Jedes
about
Land, das
how
das tut, ist
sovereignty
Teil des Westens. Und nun
underpins our
möchte ich Ihnen
greatness
noch einmal darlegen,
collectively.
wie Souveränität
Look, we
unsere
patrol our
Größe
borders to keep our
unterstreicht.
people safe,
Wir
so that they
patrouillieren
can
an unseren
continue to worship, to
Grenzen,
work,
Sicherheit für
and to make
unsere Menschen,
our
damit sie
countries great
ihrem
without
Glauben, ihrer
disruption.
Arbeit nachgehen können und unsere
We
Nation
honor the
großartig
right of
machen können, ohne
every
Unterlass.
nation
Wir
to carry on
respektieren
their
das Recht
affairs
einer
as
jeden
they
Nation,
choose,
die eigenen
so long as they
Angelegenheiten so
don't
zu
try to interfere
verfolgen,
with our
wie sie das
sovereignty
möchten,
and
solange
do
sie
harm
nicht
to our
unseren
friends.
Menschen und Freunden Schaden zufügen oder
Look, we
unsere
urge
Souveränität
other nations to
untergraben.
protect
Wir
human dignity
fordern
because
andere
we
Nationen
believe
dazu
in
auf,
unalienable rights.
menschliche Würde
We
zu achten,
support
denn wir
independent
glauben
nations.
an
Our
unveräußerliche
signature
Rechte. Wir
Our signature
unterstützen
military project
unabhängige
together
Nationen.
is a
Und unser
defensive
großes Prestigeprojekt,
alliance.
das wir gemeinsam betreiben, ist ein
We respect the rule of
defensives
law,
Bündnis.
and we honor
Wir achten die
intellectual property rights. We
Rechtsstaatlichkeit
don't
und
interfere
respektieren Recht am
in other
geistigen
nations'
Eigentum. Wir mischen
elections.
uns nicht in die Wahlen
As my
anderer Länder
29-year-old
ein.
son would say,
Mein
in the West, we just
29-jähriger
don't roll
Nick
that
würde
way.
sagen, naja, so ticken wir einfach nicht.
Respect for
Achtung
sovereignty
für
of nations
Souveränität anderer Länder.
is a secret of
Das ist das Geheimnis
central to
und auch gleichzeitig
our
der
success.
Grundstein unseres Erfolges.
The West is winning.
Der Westen obsiegt also, er
But now,
gewinnt.
more than 30 years since the fall of the wall,
Aber
countries
die
that don't
Mauer ist
respect
nun vor
sovereignty
30
still
Jahren
threaten us.
gefallen, aber es gibt immer noch
Some nations
Länder,
still
die
desire
unsere Souveränität
empire.
bedrohen und nicht achten.
Let's talk about territorial
Einige hegen
integrity, or
immer
rather,
noch
those nations
den
that
Wunsch
have
nach einem
contempt
Imperium.
for it.
Andere Länder missachten
Russia
sogar
has seized
territoriale
Crimea
Integrität.
and parts
Zum
of
Beispiel
eastern
Russland.
Ukraine
Russland hat die
and
Krim
Georgia.
eingenommen und Teile der
Iran's
Ostukraine und
missiles
Georgien.
explode on
Iranische
Saudi oil
Flugkörper
facilities,
sind
and its
detoniert
proxy
auf,
forces are present in Iraq,
saudischen
in
Ölfabriken.
Lebanon, in
Der
Syria,
Iran hat Stellvertreterkräfte
in Yemen.
im Irak, Libanon, in Syrien
China.
und im Jemen.
China
Und
encroaches
China.
on the exclusive
China
economic zones of
wirkt
Vietnam,
in die ausschließliche
Philippines,
Wirtschaftszone
and Indonesia.
in Vietnam, auf den Philippinen
And on
und
that
in
point,
Indonesien ein.
China has had a border or
Und
maritime
China hat
dispute with
übrigens
nearly
auch
every nation bordering
grenzbezogene
it.
und maritime Dispute mit fast
And
allen
let's talk for a second about
Grenzstaaten,
the other
die es
realm,
hat.
cybersecurity.
Zu einem
Huawei
anderen
and other
Bereich,
Chinese state-backed tech
Cybersicherheit.
companies are Trojan
Huawei
horses
und andere
for
vom
Chinese
chinesischen Staat
intelligence.
unterstützte Technologieunternehmen
Russia's
agieren als trojanische
disinformation
Pferde
campaigns
für den
try to turn
chinesischen
our
Nachrichten.
citizens against one
Russland
another.
nutzt Desinformationskampagnen, um unsere
Iranian
Bürger
cyberattacks
gegeneinander
plague Middle East
aufzunehmen.
computer
Iranische
networks.
Cyberangriffe plagen auch die Computersysteme im Nahen
Talked
Osten.
about physical security, we've talked about
Das
cybersecurity,
war der
economic
physische
coercion
Aspekt.
is at play
Jetzt
as well.
zu wirtschaftlichen
Russia
Zwängen
demands
genutzt
fealty in
werden.
Central
Russland
Asia. China
verlangt
demands
Gefolgschaft
silence
in
on Taiwan and
Zentralasien.
Hong Kong
China
so
verlangt
that deals
Stillschweigen
will
zu
keep
den
flowing.
Themen Taiwan und Hongkong, damit
Exacts
weiter
pieces of
Handelsabkommen
national
laufen.
infrastructure
Es verlangt
payment when
Teile
countries
nationaler
can't meet
Infrastrukturen
its onerous
als
loan
Zahlungen,
terms.
wenn Länder die erdrückenden
Let's talk too
Kreditbedingungen
about
nicht
respect
erfüllen
for other
können.
countries' political
Nun
structures.
zur Achtung für die
Iran
politischen
is
Strukturen
stifling
anderer
today,
Länder.
as we sit here, stifling
Iran
young Iraqis and
unterdrückt
Lebanese
aktuell
who want
heute
nothing
Iraker
more
und
than a
Libanesen,
clean and
die jung
sovereign
sind
government.
und eine saubere Regierung
China is
wollen.
increasingly trying to co-opt
China
officials
versucht
at the
auch
state
immer
and
wieder
local
Beamte
level.
zu vereinnahmen
Our
auf
FBI
lokaler
director,
und örtlicher
Attorney General,
Ebene.
and I have all spoken about this in just the
Der
last week. We're trying to
FBI-Leiter
affect
und
not
ich
only
haben
our federal
kürzlich erst
level,
darüber
but our
gesprochen.
state and
Das
local
passiert
officials
nicht nur
as
auf
well,
der
and that's
Bundesebene,
happening
sondern
all
auch
across
auf
Europe.
Bundesstaatenebene,
And indeed all
auch
across
in
the world.
Europa. Auf der ganzen Welt passiert
Look,
das.
this matters. This matters because
Das ist
assaults
wichtig,
on
denn das ist
sovereignty
wichtig, denn Angriffe
destabilize.
auf Souveränität führen zu
Assaults
Destabilisierung.
on sovereignty
Angriffe auf Souveränität
impoverish.
führen zu Armut.
Assaults on sovereignty
Angriffe auf
enslave.
Souveränität unterjochen andere.
Assaults on sovereignty are
Angriffe
indeed
auf
assaults on
Souveränität
the very freedom
sind
that
auch
anchors the
Angriffe auf
Western
die
ideal.
Freiheiten, die der Grundstein der westlichen
But here's
Idee
the good
sind.
news,
Aber
and
ich
there's a
habe auch
lot of
gute
it.
Nachrichten, und
The
zwar
United
viele.
States
Die
has stared and will
Vereinigten
continue to stare
Staaten
these dangerous
sehen
threats in
diesen
the face,
gefährlichen
and we will
Bedrohungen
not blink.
ins Gesicht und wir lassen
We're
nicht
protecting
nach.
our
Wir werden
citizens,
nicht
we're
nachlassen.
protecting
Wir
our
schützen
freedoms.
unsere Bürger,
We're
unsere
protecting
Freiheiten.
our sovereign
Wir
right
schützen
to choose
unser
how it is
souveränes
that we
Recht,
live.
unsere bessere Lebensweise
The United
selbst frei
States
wählen
has
zu
worked
können. Die
diligently to deprive
USA
the
haben
Islamic
stark daran
Republic of Iran of
gearbeitet,
diplomatic
der
sanctuary and
Islamischen
financial
Republik
ability
Iran
to
die
fuel its
Möglichkeit zu
campaigns of
nehmen,
terror, both in
diplomatische
the Middle East
Schutz zu finden
and
oder
right
finanzielle
here in
Möglichkeiten
Europe.
zu haben, um Terrorkampagnen
The United
durchzuführen
States
im Nahen
has woken
Osten
up
und hier in Europa.
to the world
Die USA
for
arbeiten
China's
daran,
unfair trading
dass
practices
auch andere
impact us. The
wachgerüttelt werden
Chinese
und die
Communist Party's newly
chinesischen
aggressive
unfairen
turn
Handelspraktiken sehen
and its military and
und sehen, dass sich
diplomatic
die
efforts
kommunistische
that
Partei in
confront
China aggressiver entwickelt, obwohl, sowohl im Bereich
the United
Militär
States States has armed Ukraine
Die
to help
USA haben
that
die
brave
Ukraine
nation defend
bewaffnet,
itself
dieses
from the
mutige
Russian
Land dabei zu
aggression, has worked with the
unterstützen,
Baltic
sich gegen
nations on
Russland zu wehren. Wir
cybersecurity
arbeiten mit den
to defend
baltischen Ländern
against
zusammen im Bereich
Moscow's
Cybersicherheit,
repeated
damit sie sich
cyber
gegen
attacks.
die wiederholten Cyberangriffe Moskaus wehren können.
And as a brand new statement
Und
today of our
als
support for
jüngste
sovereignty,
Bezeugung für
prosperity,
unsere
and energy
Unterstützung für
independence
Souveränität
of our
und
European friends today, I
Energieunabhängigkeit der
want to
europäischen
announce
Freude
that
möchte
through
ich etwas
the
ankündigen.
International
Durch
Development
die
Finance Corporation and
International
with the support
Development
of
Finance
our United
Corporation,
States
einer Agentur der
Congress, we
US-Regierung
intend to
und mit
provide up to
Unterstützung des
$1 billion
US-Kongresses
in
werden wir 1
financing
Milliarde
to Central
US-Dollar
and
in
Eastern European
Finanzierung
countries
in Ländern
of the
des
Three Seas
mittleren und
Initiative.
östlichen Europas zur
Our aim
Verfügung
is
stellen
quite
für die
simple.
Drei-Meeres-Initiative.
It is to
Unser Ziel
galvanize
ist einfach.
private
Wir
sector
wollen damit
investment in the
Investitionen
energy
des
sector to
Privatsektors in
protect
den
freedom and
Energiebereich
democracy
anregen,
around the world.
freie Demokratien auf der Welt zu schützen.
Now, I would ask you, as I go back to where I began,
Möchte ich nochmal dahin
are
zurückgehen, wo
these
ich angefangen
actions,
habe.
these American
Fragen Sie sich
actions, are they
nochmal,
consistent
ob
with the
diese
claim that
Aktivitäten
America has come
Amerikas
to
zu der
question the very
Behauptung
worth
passen, dass
of its
Amerika
mantle
den Wert
of
seines
global
Amtes
leadership?
als globale Führungsmacht in
Consider,
Frage
too, what
stellt.
we've done
Denken Sie auf einmal
alongside
darüber nach, was
each of
wir
you.
mit ihnen gemeinsam alles gemacht
What
haben.
we've done to support
Was wir
NATO
zum
in
Beispiel
particular. The
getan haben,
United States has
besonders
urged
die NATO zu
NATO
unterstützen. Die
onto
NATO hat
$400
die
billion
USA haben die
in new
NATO
pledges.
dazu
We did this
gedrängt,
because our
400
nations are
Milliarden
safer when we work together and when we
die
field
NATO
the
dazu gedrängt,
strongest
400
forces
Milliarden
and
Dollar
capabilities.
auszugeben, denn unsere Nationen sind sicherer,
The
wenn wir
United States has,
zusammenarbeiten.
too, with our
und unsere
allies,
stärksten Kräfte und
undertaken the most
Fähigkeiten gemeinsam
significant
einsetzen.
reinforcement of
Die
NATO's
USA
eastern
haben
flank
mit den
since the
Bündnispartnern
Cold
die
War.
größte Wiederverstärkungsmaßnahme
The
seit
United States
Ende
has
des Kalten
restored
Krieges
credibility
an
to
der
arms control when we
NATO-Flanke
withdrew from the INF treaty
Wir haben uns
with
vom
unanimous
INF-Vertrag
NATO
zurückgezogen,
support
ja, aber mit großer
after Russia
Glaubwürdigkeit
repeatedly violated
und
its
Unterstützung der
terms.
Rüstungskontrolle und das mit einstimmiger
These are
Unterstützung
just a
der
few
NATO, nachdem
signature
Russland den
efforts of American
INF-Vertrag
leadership with our
mehrmals
partners.
verletzt hat. Das sind große
We always work to bring allies and
Prestigeprojekte
partners
in
on board
Zusammenarbeit
with
mit
everything
unseren Partnern.
that it
Die
is that we
USA
do.
versuchen immer alles
We're leading,
mit
for
Partnern
example,
hier
Defender
zusammen
Europe
führend
20,
zu tun.
an
Wir haben
exercise
zum
along NATO
Beispiel
allies, the largest
die
deployment of
Defender Europe
US-based
20
forces to Europe
angefangen. Das
in
ist die
more
größte
than
Verlegung
25
von
years.
US-basierten Truppen nach
The
Europa in
United States has
25
marshaled
Jahren. Die
nations
USA
to help us protect
hat
the
andere
waterways
Länder
of the Straits
angewiesen,
of
die
Hormuz,
Seewege in der
to
Straße
defend
von
freedom of
Hormuz zu
navigation
schützen
throughout
und
the
zum
South
Beispiel die
China
Freiheit
Sea.
der Seewege im südchinesischen
The
Meer
United States, too,
aufrechtzuerhalten. Die
has
USA
worked with
haben darüber
international
hinaus
sanctions,
auch das internationale
global sanctions,
Sanktionsregime
to prevent North Korea
angeführt,
from
damit
continuing to
gegen
develop
Nordkorea,
its
damit dieses
nuclear
Land
weapons program,
das
and we've worked to bring
Nuklearwaffenprogramm
Pyongyang
nicht weiter
consistently back
fortführt und
to the negotiating
wir
table.
wollen Pyongyang unter Druck an den
We've
Verhandlungstisch
led 81
zurückgewinnen.
nations
Wir
in
führen
the
zudem
global fight
81 andere Länder
to
im
defeat the ISIS
weltweiten Kampf
caliphate.
gegen das Kalifat des Islamischen
We
Staates.
took out al-Baghdadi.
Wir haben
We
al-Baghdadi
took out the leader of
ausgeschaltet.
al-Qaeda in the
Wir
Arabian
haben
Peninsula just
den
this past
Führer
month.
von Al-Qaida in der
Is this an
arabischen
America
Halbinsel
that
diesen
rejects
Monat
the
auch
international
ausgeschaltet.
community?
Heißt das, dass die USA die internationale Gemeinschaft
I know of
ablehnen?
particular concern in
Und
this
ich weiß,
room.
in
We've
diesem
pursued
Fall
the
ist das
mission protecting
besonders
sovereignty in
wichtig.
the multilateral context.
Wir haben außerdem
A few
versucht, die
examples.
Souveränität
The United
weltweit
States
im
supported the
multilateralen
Organization
Kontext
of
zu
American
sichern.
States in its
Zum
efforts to
Beispiel,
provide
die USA haben die
institutions
Organisation
to go
amerikanischer
back to
Staaten
its
unterstützt,
mandate and
damit diese
improve its
Institution
effectiveness.
ihr Mandat und
We're
ihre
leading a
Effektivität
59-nation
gewährleisten kann.
coalition
Wir
to
führen
oust
zudem
Maduro
eine
and honor the will of the
59
Venezuelan
Nationen starke
people.
Koalition an, um
The
Präsident
United
Maduro
States is leading on the
abzusetzen
environment
und
as
den
well.
Willen des venezolanischen
The
Volkes zu
International
achten.
Energy
Wir
Agency's
führen auch im
latest
Bereich
global
Umwelt.
emissions report from
Und
just
wir
these past
haben
few weeks found that
in den
America's
letzten Wochen
energy-related CO2
durch einen
emissions
Bericht der Internationalen
declined by
Energieagentur erfahren, dass
2.9%
wir
in
unsere
2019 in spite
energiebezogenen
of significant
CO2-Ausstöße um
economic growth.
2,9% senken konnten im Jahr
The
2019.
United States has convinced
Und
the
das trotz
C5+1 to bolster
Wir sind
Central
davon
Asian
überzeugt,
nations'
dass die
sovereignty against
C5+1
Russian
in
hegemony
Zentralasien
and
unterstützt
Chinese
werden
economic
müssen in
pressure.
ihrer Souveränität gegen russische Hegemonie und
The United
chinesischen
States, too,
Wirtschaftsdruck.
has warned
Die
the
USA haben
Arctic
auch
Council
den
about
Arktischen
Russian
Rat
and
gewarnt
Chinese designs
über
to exploit the
die
Arctic
russischen
for
und
unfair
chinesischen
gain,
Pläne, die
something I know
Arktis
we
für
care
ungerechte
about
Vorteile
collectively.
auszunutzen. Denn das ist
So
ja
let's
ein
be
Raum,
straight
der uns
up.
gemeinsam wichtig ist.
The United States is
Die
out there fighting
USA
alongside you for
kämpfen
sovereignty
mit
and
Ihnen
freedom.
allen zusammen für Freiheit
We
und
should have confidence
Souveränität. Wir
in our
sollten
alliances,
Vertrauen in,
in our
in
friends.
unsere Bündnisse haben, in
The
unsere
Free West has
Freunde.
a
Der
far
freie
brighter
Westen,
future
den
than
Freie Westen
illiberal
erwartet eine viel
alternatives.
strahlendere
We're
Zukunft
winning,
als
and we're doing it together.
illiberale Alternativen. Wir gewinnen und das
The
tun wir
momentum's
zusammen.
clearly on our side.
Wir
We've got to
haben
do
eine
more.
Dynamik, ein Elan auf
Don't
unserer
be
Seite,
fooled.
aber wir müssen noch mehr
Don't be
tun.
fooled by those who say otherwise. When so-called Iranian moderates play the victim, remember their assassination and terror campaigns against innocent Iranian civilians, and right here on European soil itself. When Russia suggests that Nord Stream 2 is purely a commercial endeavor, don't be fooled. Consider the deprivations caused in the winters of 2006, 2008, and 2009, and 2015. When Huawei executives show up at your door, they say you'll lose out if you don't buy in. Don't believe the hype. Look, I know it's not without cost to be courageous, to stand up for our sovereignty, to get it. But it's never been the case that this was free.
Aber diese Dinge, die gab es
Name me a
niemals
moment in
umsonst.
history
Sagen
when
Sie
the
mir doch
weak and the
eine
meek
Gelegenheit in der Geschichte, ein Punkt in der Geschichte, wo einmal die Schwachen und Sanften gewonnen haben. Ich bin voller Zuversicht, dass der Westen gemeinsam gewinnen wird. Ich weiß, dass der Westen obsiegen wird. Da bin ich ganz stark überzeugt. Erst vor 2 Wochen etwa war ich in Kiew in der Ukraine. Ich habe dort ein Krankenhaus besucht, da ukrainische Soldaten untergebracht, die im Kampf gegen die russische Aggression verwundet worden waren. Ich habe dort einen sehr mutigen jungen Soldaten getroffen, den ich sprach. Er war schwer verletzt und er war und hatte große Schmerzen. Wir haben uns kurz miteinander ausgetauscht. Und der Dolmetscher sagte mir, dass er junger Hauptmann war. Vor einigen Jahrzehnten war ich auch mal ein junger Hauptmann. Und als ich gehen musste, dann schleppte er sich aus dem Bett, nahm sich seine Krücken, gab mir von seiner Uniform ein Abzeichen, das er abnahm von der Uniformjacke. Und das war das Logo seiner Einheit. Er gab mir das und er sagte mir, behalten Sie das. Und das war ein so wichtiger, entscheidender Moment für mich. Und das erinnert mich daran, dass ich auch für seine Souveränität kämpfe, dass es das wert ist, dafür zu kämpfen. Lassen Sie uns weiterführen. Lassen Sie uns weiter gewinnen. Gott schütze Sie, Gott schütze die Freie Welt und Gott schütze die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika.
Hello. Good morning. Very nice to see you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're running short of time. So, Secretary Pompeo, you spoke with passion and eloquence about your time as a Cold Warrior and about the sort of the strength of the
verschiedene Themen angesprochen, die Stärke des transatlantischen Bandes.
Aber
Sie haben ja auch schon gesagt, der Titel dieser Veranstaltung ist Westlessness, Ihnen nicht immer folgt, wenn Sie versuchen, dem Iran zum Beispiel gegenüberzutreten oder auch die Beziehungen zu China neu zu definieren. Das ist ja eine Riesenaufgabe und viele hier sagen, das kann man auch nur schaffen, wenn Europa und Amerika zusammenarbeiten. Das scheint nicht der Fall zu sein. Es gab Zölle, es gab Sanktionen gegen Bündnispartner. Meinen Sie, Sie können Ihre Prioritäten, ob es um Iran oder China geht, durchsetzen, wenn Europa nicht folgt, wenn Europa nicht an ihrer Seite steht, wie es ja auch im Kalten Krieg der Fall war und in der ganzen Geschichte.
I was with Secretary Baker, one of my predecessors who was in this job during roughly that time period. He reminded me that you could go back to that time and people were saying much the same thing.
Ja, das war zu jeder Zeit so. Man hat immer das Gleiche gesagt. Es gab immer Herausforderungen. Es gibt immer Probleme, es gibt immer Unterschiede zwischen unseren Ländern oder Gruppen von Ländern und das war schon immer so. Aus meiner Sicht würde ich sagen, wenn man einen Schritt zurückgeht und dann zum Beispiel das Thema Iran sich ansieht, wenn ich mit meinen europäischen Kollegen spreche, dann verstehen sie, worum es geht. Der Iran wollte zum Beispiel nicht die Blackbox zurückgeben, nachdem das kommerzielle Flugzeug abgeschützt wurde. Das sehen alle so. Jeder versteht, dass es Leute sind, die Atomwaffen anstreben. Da sind wir uns also einig. Es gibt taktische Unterschiede, wie soll man damit umgehen, aber zum Problem selbst sind wir uns einig. Ich habe den Eindruck, es hat immer Pessimisten gegeben, es hat immer Leute gegeben, die alles schwarz gesehen haben. Sie haben ja von der kommunistischen Partei Chinas gesprochen. Es gibt natürlich Wirtschaftsbeziehungen zu China. Wir lieben das chinesische Volk. Wir haben viele Studenten aus China in unserem Land. Aber die kommunistische Partei von Chinas ist ein Risiko für uns. Nicht für den Westen als Ort, sondern für die Ideen, die Werte des Westens. Wir möchten unsere Bevölkerung schützen, ob es jetzt um die Infrastruktur geht. Informationen müssen geschützt werden, die in den Netzen unterwegs sind. Und natürlich, die Europäer setzen sich ein für Datenschutz. Das geht aber nicht, wenn wir Bedenken haben gegen die Kommunistische Partei Chinas, dass sie unsere Informationen abgreift. Wir müssen unsere Ziele erreichen, wir müssen schnell sein. Es geht nicht darum, dass Europa den Vereinigten Staaten folgt. Sie haben diese Formulierung verwendet. Es geht nicht um Folge. Wir wollen Partner sein. Wir wollen zusammenarbeiten. Es gibt Probleme, es gibt Herausforderungen im Bereich des Handels, es geht auch um Handelssysteme, Zölle und natürlich fließen ständig Milliarden von Dollar zwischen unseren Ländern hin und her, auch jetzt im Moment, da wir hier sprechen. Natürlich gibt es immer Probleme und Meinungsunterschiede, wie wir mit Problemen umgehen, aber die Probleme selbst, da sind wir uns einig, wir werden gemeinsam handeln, gemeinsam erfolgreich sein. Alle, die die westlichen Ideale teilen, müssen zusammenarbeiten. Demokratie, Menschenrechte, Freiheit, souveräne Nationen sind besser und diejenigen von uns, die das glauben, müssen auch zusammenarbeiten, dann erreichen wir das zusammen. Das passiert nicht ohne schwere Arbeit, wir müssen uns anstrengen, wir müssen gerne länger mit ansprechen. Wenn wir noch Zeit haben, können wir gerne noch Fragen beantworten. Aber leider, wir haben einen strikten Zeitplan.
Thank you very much for your time. Let's continue the discussion on Twitter, everyone. Thank you very much.
Wir können ja auf Twitter weiter diskutieren. Vielen Dank.
Too quick of a session.
Thank you for that.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I want to thank the Munich Security Conference for inviting me to speak this morning. Ambassador Issenger, it's great to see you put on a great event as you and I talked last night, reminisced. I remember it, my first one 20 years ago as Verkunda. I think I was stuffed in a back room somewhere for the duration, but it was a fantastic event. At that time, we had maybe a dozen members of the United States Congress, and today I think we have nearly 50. And I think it's a great demonstration of the bipartisanship in the United States Congress and the interest they have in important matters of foreign policy. I also want to thank the German government in Munich for hosting us. As some of you may know, I was a young Army officer many years ago assigned to Italy. My unit, airborne unit, used to come frequently to Germany and train in Hohenfels and Grafenfeld and Wilflicken and Wilsig. I got to know the German people well. And I used to bring my family here. And my young son, who was also born in Europe, we used to bring him up and he used to run around the square, the plaza, beneath the Glockenspiel and chase the birds. So it's always great to come back to this wonderful city and to see the wonderful people that are here. So I'd like to speak to you today about the number one priority of the United States Department of Defense, implementing the National Defense Strategy. The NDS states that we are now in an era of great power competition, with our principal challengers being China, then Russia, and that we must shift our focus away from low-intensity conflict and prepare once again for high-intensity warfare. At the same time, it recognizes that our second-tier priorities are rogue states such as North Korea and Iran. And finally, dealing with violent extremist organizations will likely be an enduring threat for years to come. Being in Europe, I know that there has been much discussion about the challenges from Russia. So this morning, I want to focus on the Pentagon's top concern, the People's Republic of China. Next year will mark the 20th anniversary of a decision that fundamentally altered the course of international affairs, China's admission into the World Trade Organization. I was working in the United States Senate at the time, and two competing arguments over China's membership dominated the public debate. The prevailing notion of the day was that if we allowed the PRC into the WTO and other multilateral institutions, China would continue on its path of economic reform and eventually become a market-oriented trading partner. More broadly, increased engagement with the liberal world order would also spur political opening and help transform the PRC into a responsible global stakeholder. And who knows, maybe even a democracy one day. The more skeptical voices argued that if granted membership, China would use the benefits of free trade and open international order to grow its economy and access technology required to build a strong military and security state capable of expanding the reach of its authoritarian rule. These were both credible arguments, but we all know which one is winning right now. It's not the former. In fact, under President Xi's rule, the Chinese Communist Party is heading even faster and further in the wrong direction. More internal repression, more predatory economic practices, more heavy-handedness, and most concerning for me, a more aggressive military posture. It is essential that we, as an international community, wake up to the challenges presented by China's manipulation of the long-standing international rules-based order that has benefited all of us for many decades. The Communist Party and its associated organs, including the People's Liberation Army, are increasingly operating in theaters outside its borders, including Europe, and seeking advantage by any means and at any cost. Let me state up front, though, the United States does not seek conflict with China. In fact, we look for areas of cooperation when our interests converge in the hope that they will choose the other path that they didn't select 2 decades ago. Just look at the nearly 18 tons of medical supplies the United States recently provided to the PRC to help fight the coronavirus. And last week, we announced more than $100 million in assistance to China and other countries affected by that malady. The world is too interconnected for us not to work together to solve some of our toughest problems. However, to be a responsible member of the international community, China must be transparent and respect the sovereignty, freedom, and rights of all nations. Unfortunately, their current behavior leaves great cause for concern. The United States National Defense Strategy recognizes this critical challenge as we adapt and prepare our forces to deal with China in this new era of great power competition. The PRC's growing economic, military, and diplomatic power often manifests itself in ways that are threatening, coercive, and counter to the rules-based international order. Over time, we have watched them seize and militarize islands in the South China Sea and rapidly modernize their armed forces while seeking to use emerging technologies to alter the landscape of power and reshape the world in their favor, and often at the expense of others. I continue to stress to my friends in Europe, just as I did this past week at the NATO Defense Ministerials Conference in Brussels, that America's concerns about Beijing's commercial and military expansion should be their concerns as well. This September will mark the 75th commemoration of the end of World War II and the birth of the international rules-based order that has supported security and prosperity around the globe. The United States, our NATO allies, and partners across the Indo-Pacific have sacrificed blood and treasure over the decades to protect and preserve it. Yet the PRC seeks to undermine and subvert the system, the same one that allowed them to rise and become what they are today. As we speak, Communist China is exerting financial and political pressure publicly and privately on many Indo-Pacific and European nations, large and small, while pursuing new strategic relationships worldwide. In fact, the smaller the country, the heavier the hand of Beijing. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, for example, the PRC is leveraging its overseas investments to force other nations into suboptimal security decisions. This has wide-reaching ramifications for the United States and our allies in critical
tiefgreifend
areas like
aus
data
auf die
security,
USA und andere
interoperability,
Länder, auch im Bereich
and military
Datenschutz,
readiness.
Interoperabilität,
While
militärische
we often
Bereitschaft.
doubt the transparency and forthrightness of
Die
Beijing,
Transparenz
when it comes to their
und die
security
Offenheit
aims, we
China darf
should take the Chinese
angezweifelt
government
werden.
at their
Wir
word.
müssen dafür sorgen, dass
They have
China
said
beim
that
Wort
by
genommen wird, wenn sie
2035,
Versprechungen
the
machen.
PRC intends to
China hat
complete its
gesagt, bis
military modernization.
2025
And by 2049, it seeks to
wird China auf
dominate
uns
Asia
zugehen,
as
aber
the
bis
preeminent global military
2049
power.
möchte China die dominante Macht im
Furthermore,
asiatischen Raum sein.
The global community should be deeply concerned
Die
about the party's use
Weltgemeinschaft
of
muss sich
artificial
Sorgen
intelligence
machen
and
über
other
den Einsatz
technologies to
künstlicher
surveil
Intelligenz und
and
anderer
repress
Technologien,
Muslim minorities, journalists,
gegen muslimische
pro-democracy protesters,
Minderheiten
and
vorzugehen,
others.
demokratische
To make
Opposition
matters
zu
worse,
unterdrücken.
the government is now
Und das wird noch
exporting
verschärft durch den
those tools
Export
worldwide in a
dieser
manner that could bolster
Instrumente,
other
der von
authoritarian
China
regimes.
angestrebt wird.
China's rapid ascent has stirred much debate over the primacy of the
Chinas
United States and the
Aufstieg
West
hat
in the 21st century.
im
I
21.
understand this topic is
Jahrhundert
part
viele
of this year's
Diskussionen
Munich Security Conference
ausgelöst, auch bei der Münchner
China's
Sicherheitskonferenz.
growth over the
Ein
years
wichtiges
has been
Thema.
remarkable,
China ist über die Jahre
but in many
aufgestiegen,
ways
und
it
zwar
is
in
fueled by
beachtlicher
theft
Art
and
und Weise.
coercion
Aber
and
oft
exploitation
kam es auch
of free
durch
market
Ausbeutung,
economies,
durch Diebstahl,
private
durch Ausbeutung
companies,
der
and
Marktwirtschaften
colleges and
dazu.
universities. American and European institutions
Die
and corporations face the
amerikanischen und
brunt
europäischen
of these
Institutionen
malign activities, and we have
hatten
often
auch
seen
zu
a
leiden
multitude
unter
of
diesem
examples
Eingreifen Chinas.
where
Es
our
gibt viele
economies
Beispiele
and our
dafür.
companies
Unsere
have suffered
Volkswirtschaften, unsere
as a
Firmen
result.
mussten leiden unter dieser
But
Einmischung
Beijing's
Chinas.
behavior,
Das
bad
Verhalten
behavior, will only take
Pekings,
them so far.
das negative
The world
Verhalten
is increasingly
wird aber
aware of its
nicht
motives and
den
responding
Sieg
in turn.
davontragen. Wir müssen darauf reagieren, wir müssen
Regrettably,
dem
rather
entgegentreten.
than change course, party leadership continues
Leider ist es
its rampant technology theft,
immer noch so, dass
while resolving
China
to
diese
eventually
Politik
end its
des
reliance on
Diebstahls
foreign innovation
weiterverfolgt.
altogether, then independently develop its own systems,
Erst
and
wird
then
Know-how
dominate critical sectors and markets.
gestohlen, dann entwickeln sie ihre eigene
Huawei and
Technologie und
5G are
vermarkten sie
today's poster
weltweit.
child for this nefarious strategy.
Im Bereich 5G, Huawei sehen
History
wir
has
das
proven
wieder.
time and again,
Und die
though, that
Geschichte hat immer wieder
authoritarianism
gezeigt,
breeds corruption,
dass
promotes conformity,
autoritäre
smothers free
Regime zu
thinking, and
Korruption
suppresses
führen.
freedom.
Das führt zu weiteren
In
Problemen
stark
und die
contrast to
Freiheit
this are
leidet
our
darunter.
values.
Unsere
sense
Werte
of fairness
stehen
and a
dem
culture of
gegenüber.
opportunity where
Fairness,
which
gleiche
encourages disruption
Chancen
and
für
unleashes the
alle.
very best of human intellect, spirit, and innovation.
Und so kann
This is why it is critical that together we, all of us, directly and unambiguously address Beijing's actions and intentions so that we are never intimidated or duped or pushed into bad security, economic, or political choices.
In Bezug auf die
And maybe,
Sicherheit und auch auf die Volkswirtschaft
just
nicht
maybe, we can get
einschüchtern.
them on the right path.
Vielleicht können wir China noch auf den
Again,
rechten
make
Weg
no mistake, we do not seek
Wir
conflict
machen
with
uns
China.
nichts vor. Wir
It's not what we
wollen
want,
nicht
not at all.
Konflikte mit China. Das
Rather,
wollen wir
we seek
überhaupt
fair
nicht.
and
Wir
open
möchten mit
competition in
China
the
einen
economic
offenen
realm.
und freien
And in
Wettbewerb
general,
in
we
der
simply ask
Wirtschaft.
of Beijing what we
Und
ask
wir
of every nation.
erwarten einfach das von
To
China, was
play
wir
by
von
the
anderen
rules,
Nationen
to
erwarten.
abide by
Sie müssen die
international
Regeln
norms,
einhalten.
and to respect the rights
Internationale
and
Regeln und
sovereignty of
Standards
others.
einhalten, die Souveränität und die
To restore an equal
Rechte
footing,
anderer
the
einhalten.
Department of Defense is doing its share. We are
Wir
focused on
als
deterring bad
Verteidigungsministerium
behavior,
tragen zu diesem
reassuring our friends and allies, and
Chancengleichheit bei.
defending the
Wir
global commons.
unterstützen unsere
And
Freunde,
to
unsere
maintain the
Alliierten
peace
und
through
wir
strength,
setzen
we
uns
are
für den
implementing the United
Frieden
States
ein.
National Defense Strategy.
Wir setzen unsere
As part of this strategy, we're
Verteidigungsstrategie
doing our
Zu
part to
dieser Strategie
safeguard
gehört
American
es,
innovation
dass wir
and to reinvigorate our
amerikanische
industrial base.
Innovationen schützen, unsere
Thanks to our largest
Wirtschaftsbasis
research and
schützen.
development budget in 70 years, we are
Wir
investing
haben
in cutting-edge
ein stärkeres
technologies and
Forschungsbudget
accelerating
als
the
in den
modernization
letzten
of our
70
force.
Jahren und damit
While
unterstützen
at the
wir
same
die
time,
Modernisierung
divesting from
auch
legacy
unserer
systems and
Streitkräfte.
reinvesting
Aber natürlich
those savings
behalten wir
into
auch
hypersonic missiles, artificial
bewährten
intelligence,
Systeme bei, wir
autonomous
verbessern
systems,
sie, wir
and many
stützen
other
autonome
game-changing
Systeme
technologies.
und andere wichtige
Unlike China
Technologien
and others,
fördern
we
wir.
will use these advanced
Im
capabilities to
Gegensatz zu
keep the
China
peace,
möchten wir
to
diese
promote
Technologien
prosperity,
für
to
den
ensure
Frieden und den
security,
Wohlstand
and to protect the
einsetzen. Wir
sovereignty,
möchten die
the
Freiheit
sovereignty of
schützen
all
und die
freedom-loving
Souveränität
countries.
aller freiheitsliebenden Länder
For example,
schützen.
while
Das
Beijing
unterscheidet
uses
uns von China.
AI to tighten its grip
China setzt die
over its
künstliche
people,
Energie ein,
the Department of
das
Defense has
die eigene
established
Volk zu
well-regarded principles for
kontrollieren.
the lawful and ethical use
Aber
of
wir
AI.
setzen die künstliche
While the
Intelligenz
PRC develops and
gemäß
deploys
unserer
long-range
Gesetze
fires to
ein.
intimidate and threaten its neighbors,
Wir wollen
we are
unsere
investing in both conventional and
Nachbarn
advanced
nicht
missile
einschützen, wie China
defense
das
systems
tut,
to protect the
sondern
homeland, our
wir
interests, and our
schützen
allies.
unsere Interessen und auch
And while
unsere
Communist China is
Verteidigungssysteme setzen wir dafür
weaponizing
ein.
the space domain through the
Wir
development of
möchten nicht
directed
den
energy
Weltraum
weapons
bewaffen,
and
wie
killer
China das
satellites,
möchte. Wir
the
möchten keine
Pentagon is standing up its
Killersatelliten,
first new military service in over 70 years. The United States Space Force, to ensure freedom of use, freedom of commerce, and freedom of navigation into and through space for all. Simply put, the contrast between China's actions and United States leadership couldn't be more obvious. At the same time, we are protecting these high-tech breakthroughs from theft and exploitation by strengthening our foreign investment laws, supply chains, export controls, university-based research, and cyber defenses, all of which have been long-standing attack points of the Chinese government. We are encouraged that our allies and partners are beginning to take similar actions as they thoroughly assess the long-term threats and challenges posed by China. Among these concerns is a dependence on emerging technologies that could inject serious risk into our defense cooperation. Reliance on Chinese 5G vendors, for example, could render our partners' critical systems vulnerable to disruption, manipulation, and espionage. It could also jeopardize our communications and intelligence sharing capabilities, and by extension, it can jeopardize our alliances. To counter this, we are encouraging allied and U.S. tech companies to develop alternative 5G solutions, and we are working alongside them to test these technologies at our military bases as we speak. In the long run, developing our own secure 5G networks will far outweigh any perceived gains from partnering with heavily subsidized Chinese providers that ultimately answer to party leadership. In short, let's be smart. Let's learn from the past. And let's get 5G right so we don't regret our decisions later. The reality of the 21st century is that many economic decisions are also national security decisions. We are not asking our partners to reject engagement with China. Just the opposite. We want you to show them the right path, and we want you to nudge them down it. In the meantime, though, we are asking our friends to clearly choose a global system, the global system that supports democracy, protects human rights, and safeguards our greatest asymmetric advantages, our values, our shared interests, and our unmatched network of alliances and partnerships. We feel that the choice is clear, but recognize it may be tough, that the economic challenges may take a toll in the short run, but that our collective future may hang in the balance if we fail to make the hard choices now for the long run. The United States does not want an adversarial relationship with China. It's a great country with an extraordinary history, a rich culture, and a wonderful people. Rather, we want China to behave like a normal country that adheres to the international rules and order that generations before us have fought hard to protect and preserve. And that means the Chinese government. The government needs to change its policies and behaviors. If the PRC will not change its ways, then defending the system must be our collective priority. We can only do this by making greater investments in our common defense, by making the hard economic and commercial choices needed to prioritize our shared security, and by working together to maintain a ready and capable alliance network that is prepared to deter any threat, to defend any ally, and to defeat any foe. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our questions.
Vielen Dank für Ihre Zeit, und jetzt werde ich gerne Ihre Fragen beantworten.
Pleasure. Please take a seat.
You're mic'd. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, once again, we are running out of time for questions, but I shan't let the opportunity go by to fall back on my NATO beat. Mr. Secretary, you were just here in Brussels with us. And I would like to know if we have any more details now about the reduction of violence. When is this period going to start? Do we have any more precision on that? And also, what is the U.S. government doing to bring in the Afghan government on this? I had heard there may be even some meetings between U.S. government officials and President Ghani here at this meeting, and also on Iraq. You are asking NATO allies to do more with the coalition, to take over some of some tasks being filled by the U.S. right now, so that may free you up for other jobs. How have the NATO allies responded? What exactly are you asking them to do? How is that going?
Let's start with Afghanistan. So we have on the table right now a reduction in violence proposal that was negotiated between our ambassador and the Taliban. It looks very promising. We have now been for a few days now in the process of consulting, first with our Congress. I've had many conversations. And then secondly, concurrently with our NATO allies in Brussels. We had 2 good days of consultation, well led by Secretary General Stoltenberg, who, by the way, is doing an exceptional job. I think there's general agreement. It's my view as well that we we have to give peace a chance, that the best, if not only way forward in Afghanistan is through a political agreement. And that means taking some risk. That means enabling our diplomats, and that means working together with our partners and allies on the ground to effect such a thing. Now, yesterday, Secretary Pompeo and I met with President Ghani. We had at least an hour-long discussion with him. I think he is fully on board. He wants to lead his part of the process, which, if we get to that, would be a peace deal that would involve very soon afterward an inter-Afghan negotiation. He wants to be clearly a full partner in that and wants to lead on that and make sure that all Afghans come together, are well representative, and can come up with an agreement that would endure so that we could end this long conflict and make sure that Afghanistan stays on the right path.
No more details on what tasks NATO allies may be willing to take?
So we had a good discussion also with our NATO partners. As you know, the proposal on the table that was agreed to in principle, that NATO would pick up more of a mandate, would be willing to put additional forces into Iraq as part of our NATO mission Iraq. That would allow NATO to pick up more slack, if you will, and to address that mission in a way that we continue the two most important things we're trying to do in Iraq as a coalition and as an alliance. First, continue the enduring defeat of ISIS. And by the way, yesterday, I and the German defense minister hosted 82 countries, organizations. We keep adding partners to this coalition, all committed to the enduring defeat of ISIS. And that's very important. The second task we have in Iraq is to train, advise, and assist the Iraqi security services so that over time they could pick up in total that mission and ensure that ISIS does not come back and present the challenge it does to Iraq in particular, but the region more broadly.
Secretary Esper, let me take you back to the main theme of your intervention, China. You mentioned Huawei. Now, there has been a very extensive, very complex campaign on behalf of the Trump administration engaging with allies on this issue. But it does not seem to be working because key NATO allies in Europe, Britain, France, Germany, are seemingly not going to exclude Huawei from building their 5G networks. I mean, I think members of your administration have said that this will have consequences. Could you tell me what kind of consequences will this have? And will you reconsider the strategy on this issue?
This past week was probably my third or fourth defense ministerial at NATO in Brussels. At each time I've gone, we've discussed this issue. When I first got there in June, we had a wide spectrum of views on this issue. I can tell you that countries have moved. You have some countries who clearly understand the threat, the challenges. You have some in between, and you have some, on the other hand, who don't recognize the threats. I think that if you look around the globe, the United States clearly understands at this point in time. I think it's a shared bipartisan view in Washington of the threats and challenges posed by China in general and Huawei in particular. It took us some years to get to that understanding, and I think Europe is a little bit behind us. And I think over time, as we are able to share information and intelligence and work with one another, we will get there. The consequences of this, and I've made them clear in my remarks, if we don't understand the threat and we don't do something about it, at the end of the day, it could compromise what is the most successful military alliance in history, NATO, something that we are deeply invested in, something that I, as a young soldier, served in here in Europe as an officer, and we can't lose that. We can't lose that ability to share information, to exchange intelligence, to discuss operational plans, because we fear that our networks are compromised. That is the consequence we face, at least the foremost one for me as Secretary of Defense, as we look at this growing challenge.
But Secretary, even Britain, member of the Five Eyes, they have a very sophisticated capability to detect threats like that. They've decided to go ahead with it. So, I mean, what specifically do you think will be the consequences of this? Will they stop sharing intel with the British, or will Huawei just build the networks in Europe?
We have to take a look at these each country's approaches and thinking one step at a time. I've yet been able to digest what the UK has proposed, and there's just because you want to take one step forward doesn't mean you can't take two steps backward. We have to work with them and understand. Of course, at the end of the day, we're going to have to assess
assess what the threat is to our networks and to our ability to exchange information. And we want to continue that dialogue. Like I said, one of the challenges, when you have a heavily subsidized company, Huawei, that is answers to the Chinese government, and that can use those subsidies to offer good technology at a very low price, that's very seductive. They can draw you in. That's the way a company gets market share. But you have to think about the long-term consequences, and that's what we're most concerned about, and that's what we keep talking to our partners around the world, whether it's Europe, Asia, you name it. This challenge is out there, and different countries have taken different stances on this, and I've had many private conversations where you'll hear that there's this competition within a government is happening. Some folks have very clearly see the threat, the challenge, and others don't because of what's economically on the table.
We have, excuse me, we have about 5 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question and then also take one from the audience. So please, whoever wants to ask a question, get ready to hop up. Secretary Esper, I asked this also of the Secretary General. Are you concerned that if things move ahead in Afghanistan and you are able to draw down troops, that you will not have full visibility out in the provinces, that you won't actually know if the Taliban is adhering to the deal because you don't have boots on the ground anymore? And you've also got ISIS there now. So how can you feel confident? How can you feel confident that you can't pull back?
Well, I think
if you get to that point.
I think Secretary General Stoltenberg made the same point. Nobody's right now calling for the complete removal of U.S. and coalition forces. U.S. forces will remain there as long as necessary to support our Afghan partners and allies. We are committed to continuing both our material and financial support to the Afghan national defense and security forces. At the same time, any reduction in forces will be conditions-based. And I've had extensive conversations with my commanders, with General Miller. I've been to Afghanistan a few times. He is very confident that we'll have enough information, sufficient information, either through our own technical means, through other measures, through help with the Afghans, to understand exactly what is happening on the ground and to make sure that what the Taliban commits to do will be what they have done. And to make a decision at the right points every step forward to make sure that, again, conditions-based apply, and we're very careful and thoughtful as we move through this process.
And you're not worried about ISIS using it as a safe haven since they have moved in during the time that you've been on the ground.
Well, ironically, between coalition forces and the Taliban, we've done great damage to ISIS. They are a much more reduced and marginalized force. That said, we have to keep a careful eye on them. At the end of the day, the goal is this: make sure that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for terrorists that can attack our countries. That's our commitment. That's our goal. Whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS or somebody else, we are committed to doing that.
Thomas Ilves.
Thomas Ilves hat eine Frage.
Former president of Estonia.
Ehemaliger Präsident von Estland.
Yeah. He probably doesn't need one.
Mr. Secretary, many of us in Europe agree that there are significant dangers with Huawei, and the U.S. for at least a year has been telling us do not use Huawei. Are you offering an alternative? Are you going to subsidize Nokia and Ericsson? I mean, what do we get? What is it that we should do other than not use Huawei?
Außer nicht Huawei nutzen.
It's a great point. We obviously have to develop alternatives, right? We can't say do nothing and leave the space open. So these are the issues we're discussing within the United States government. DOD is doing its share. As I mentioned in the remarks, what we're doing is hosting on a handful of our military bases. We're asking providers of 5G to come in. I have the ability to clear away any type of regulatory paperwork and obstacles so they can come in and test 5G systems on our bases to prototype and to see how quickly we can move forward. And we're fully working this hand in glove with our commercial vendors to make sure we can advance those technologies. But I think what you've raised are the things we've been discussing within our NATO ministerial meetings.
I'm actually looking for some national security women to raise their hands. We've got one. Okay, this is our last question, please.
Also, letzte Frage von einer Dame.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, Natalie.
Many thanks. Natalie Tocci from the Institute for International Affairs. Coming back to Asia and China, beyond transatlantic dialogue, what would you like to see NATO do more in Asia vis-à-vis China?
Well, I spoke in my remarks about being aware of the challenges that China faces in the long run. I think right now the most important thing for NATO is building NATO readiness. We had a very good meeting in London, the Leaders Summit, where we all agreed on what's called the NATO Readiness Initiative. We met our marks with regard to having 30 squadrons, 30 naval surface combatants, and 30 mechanized battalions ready to go within 30 days. That's very important to NATO's readiness. I think first and foremost, NATO should focus on the security of the continent, deterring Russian bad behavior, and unifying and making sure the alliance is ready at a moment's notice. And then beyond that, we've talked about expanding, we've talked about NATO Middle East. But at the same time, concurrently, we have to be aware of the long-term challenges presented by China. Right now, it's first and foremost would be what's happening in the economic and commercial realm, and then over time, as we think about China writ large, something, by the way, we agreed to in the Leaders Summit about the NATO taking an approach toward China, understanding the long-term challenge that presents.
May I have last question from China?
I am actually waiting for instructions on whether President Macron is standing behind us. Does anybody see him? Throwing daggers at me out here? Can we take one more question?
Quick question from China.
Yes, please.
Already had the
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Quick.
About China.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm from China, Wu Sichun. Mr. Secretary, in your remarks, you mentioned that United States doesn't seek to confront with China. Instead, the United States would seek to cooperate with China. Could you give us some examples where the United States is really willing to work together with China?
Yeah, no, I think there are a number of areas. Look, you can look in the economic realm where we cooperate, in the diplomatic space. We cooperated together for many years with regard to counter-piracy off the African coast. I think there's much more we can do in terms of disaster relief and humanitarian affairs. But look, at the same time, we're working together, the United States, closely with many of its ASEAN Plus partners to make sure that China respects the EEZs and the fishing zones and the other territorial claims that are clearly within the bounds of international law in that part of the world. So those are other areas where we need to work with them, establishing a code of conduct for good behavior. So I think we need to explore and exploit as much as possible areas of cooperation between the United States and China, because I'm not willing to give up on them. I don't think the United States government is either. We've got to continue working with them. It's not an issue of China, it's an issue of the leadership, and make sure they recognize that we can all benefit. To use their term win-win, we can have a win-win strategy if we just abide by the international rules and norms that have been set in place for decades and that have benefited all of us, and that respect human rights and respect sovereignty and respect all the things that we value as Western nations.
So we have to wrap it up. President Macron of France is going to fall to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for making time. This was great to have a conversation.
Yes,